Hey Jellyspoons, Moxi here with a quick content warning for this next bit. It's short, but some pretty nasty stuff happens to Moxi, so please watch with care. Moxi landed with a thud, smack on his face. Arms splayed out, immediate broken nose, blood starts pouring down his face as he pushes himself upwards and he stares around. He's on hard, grey cobblestone and the world is quite red and quite dark. And he knows he's back in the 9 hells. He hears a shriek of rage and his mother comes storming out of her house down the front steps towards him, and as he pushes himself up and stands there wiping the blood from his nose, calls out, I'm sorry Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't do it. But his mother interrupts him. She's pushing devils out of the way. They're all starting to encircle the scene. She reaches towards him and she grabs the hilt of the sword off his back and she pulls it off him and she flings it to the side. She then reaches and grabs the cloak off him and tears it. The poppers pop around his neck. And she flings it aside uncaring. Some devils in the crowd grab it and start fighting over it, and Moxi stands there. I'm sorry Mom, I'll do anything, but I can't kill him. I'm sorry, And before he can say I love him, his mother has reached for him and put her hand over his mouth and she's walking him backwards and she's snarling at him in Infernal. He's not her son and he's a traitor and a disappointment. He's an oath breaker. He swore, he promised to her, and she's disappointed and Moxi's there like, I'm sorry. And he's trying to say he's sorry and she's just gripping him tighter and tighter. When she's finished her tirade, she pushes him over and kicks him onto his front and he lands and he pushes himself up again and shouts to her, Mom! And as he turns, he hears shing! And his mother has drawn the great sword and she is walking back towards him, holding it in just one hand because, dear God, this woman's powerful! And she strides towards him and she places her foot bang on the centre of his spine and she rams him back down onto the ground. And as all the watching devils start to laugh, she's screeching again in Infernal like, you're a traitor, you're a liar. She reaches out and grabs the tip of his tail and holds it straight up in the air, and in one smooth shing, Moxi's mother slices his tail off pretty much at the base. Just about that. Moxi barely has time to register this. He is just so scared that he's disappointed her and he's crying and begging her to please forgive him. He'll try again, he'll do anything, but he can't do that. Please Mom, please give me anything else. Any of my other tests. Tell me, I'll fight 1,000,000 people. I'll kill anyone else but not him. And she takes his tail and she chucks it to the side, and I think a bunch of devils came forward and ate it, I'm not sure. And then he hears the sword just clatter, doosh, 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 to the ground. He starts to push himself round on his elbows and he looks up at her and he says, I'm sorry. And she just kneels over him. She bends down on the floor and she drops to her knees over his chest and she's snarling at him, and every time she speaks, the Infernal crackles and sizzles flames off her tongue, and she says, you are no son of mine. She reaches for his horns. She pushes her knee deep into his stomach and she bends his horns forwards with all the strength she has, and Moxi begins to scream as he hears them splinter, and both at once, without batting an eye, she twists his horns round and splinters them, and he's left with 2 crooked, jagged stumps sticking out the side of his head. And she kicks him down onto his back and he lies there. And as he's staring up at his mom, she stands up, wipes her hands on her dress that's now covered in blood, and she just says to him, was it worth it? And all Moxi can think to say is, I'm sorry, I love him. And his mother laughs. You have failed me, and you are no longer my son. I curse you, and may you be damned. And all over his body, Moxi feels this burning heat. It's blinding him. Even as a tiefling, it's too hot, and then black. This was the second time that both Moxi and his player were certain he was dead. Moxi came to consciousness as he sort of landed with a splat in the mud just outside the keep. He picked himself up and managed to open the door and sort of stagger back inside, where the rest of the party found him curled up by the fire. His missing tail was pouring blood, he was covered in bruises, he looked horrendous. The party heal him as best they can, and while they're healing him up, one of the party members says, Moxi, what happened? But the DM interrupts and says, you tried to say Moxi, but what comes out of your mouth is betrayer. And player and character looks surprised and everyone looks at them, and someone else says, what? And the person says, I tried to say Moxi. And the DM interrupts again and says, okay, you tried to say Moxi, what comes out this time is scum. And over the course of this conversation, they realise that his name has been cursed, his name itself, and the other players do some rolls and they get some good knowledge and they realise that this is a curse from Asmodeus himself. Anyone who says his name or writes it down, it will come out as scum, betrayer, traitor, that kind of thing. So Moxi doesn't even have a name anymore. That's when they sort of take a closer look at him and they realise that the burning he felt before he blacked out was all these words appearing on his skin. He's been branded. They've gone over all his tattoos. He had tattoos of like his dad's face on his arm. He had the Land Ahoy, every single one. He's been covered, littered all over with deep black obsidian branding. It's all in Infernal and it says things like traitor written down the side of his throat. He's got betrayer. I think it said scum right down the side of his face, and it's everywhere. He is plastered all over with it, written in Infernal: betrayer, scum, filth, liar. And so they work out that his mother and Asmodeus cursed him, his name, his soul, everything about him. And that is how Moxi became an Oathbreaker for the second time in that campaign. They sent a message to his aunt, who arrived moments later with a teleportation spell. She stormed up the stairs screaming, "Where is he? Where is he?" And when she arrived, Moxi just said to the party, "Oh god, Mom didn't kill me, but she's going to." And his aunt storms in the room. They explain to her what happened. He can't say his name. She tries to say Moxi, it comes out scum. They explain to her what's happened, and she looks at him and kneels down in front of him, and she just gives him the biggest hug, and Moxi just starts to cry, and he hugs her back and he says, I'm sorry, I should have listened to you, I'm so sorry. And she sits back and she looks at him and she says, "I will kill that bitch." And through all the emotion and the tears, Moxi just says, please don't go anywhere near her. I don't want her to hurt you, please don't. And it takes a very good persuasion roll, but Moxi persuades his aunt not to attempt to go to the Nine Hells and kill his mom. Once he'd healed up, they did some more travelling, they did some more adventuring, they continued to fight the big bad guy. That was getting worse. The world moved on around him and Moxi needed a new name. And eventually he came up with Benji Lavore. Benji because I, as the player, like the name. Moxi thought it sounded a little bit like Moxi. And Lavore because that was his aunt's surname. Anyone who's watched Critical Role may recognise that surname. It turns out that Moxi / Benji was very distantly related to the Ruby of the Sea. That was fun for me to discover. He took on his aunt's surname, and when he went to visit her before they left, he told her that he'd chosen to use her surname. He asked if that would be alright, and he said, "I'm really sorry for everything I've done. I wish you were my mom instead." And his aunt just smiled and said, I wish so too.